Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Cairns Catches Up. Tom Cairns, your host, and I'll be speaking to people within the sports media broadcasting world, most especially in motorsport, and to talk about their careers and the challenges and barriers of which they've had to overcome along the way. Now, today's guest, I've got a bit of a treat for you because he's the man who you may recall as the voice of IndyCar on Sky Sports F1, and you may have come across him on other sports as well, including the Olympics and in Premiership Rugby. It's a Mr. Tom Gaymor. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So many people, when they see my face, they're like, that's what you look like." Because as we know on the Sky coverage of IndyCar, we stay with the world feed pictures, and so I add my voice to those. We only have the studio for the 500, so a lot of people don't get to see my face. So here I am, and yeah, thanks for having me on.
No problem. And I have to say, I've listened to you for a number of years now, Tom. Obviously you've commentated. Well, when NBC Sports run an ad break over where they are, that's when you sort of chip in to sort of add your analysis on what you've seen in the last sort of 10, 15 minutes of what's happened since the last ad break. So just sort of run through us the sort of structure behind what you do as a commentator and like what do you have to do in your position, because as we all know you're a commentator, but there are sort of challenges which you have to do to sort of
Yeah, I
follow.
think with my IndyCar role with Sky and formerly BT, that's now known as TNT, we fill the breaks. American sport, they have a lot of commercial breaks and fit a lot of ad time into their live sports, and we don't have that over here. When you watch, whether or not it's rugby or a Grand Prix, Formula One, for example, you'll watch it from start to finish uninterrupted, unless there's, of course, half time. And that's not the case in America with the IndyCar or NASCAR or whatever you're watching, or the NFL, for example, that Sky cover. You'll have so many breaks in the actual live segments of the race or the match. And instead of having dead air, I'll step in and try and inform the audience as to what's going on and try and keep everyone engaged and entertained in those moments. And, if you've got 14 to 16 ad breaks that are sort of 3 to 5 minutes long, you do the maths, that's, a huge segment of time that you're actually filling over the broadcast. So, it's a real joy. It's a real honor. I've absolutely loved the last sort of half dozen years, really, being the voice of IndyCar. It's something that I'm madly passionate about. I love the way the Americans do sport. And then IndyCar as a championship as well, the way that is shaped and formed over three different disciplines: street, road, oval, and the fact that it's, one chassis manufacturer and two engine formula means that it's so incredibly close, so difficult to predict who's going to win and who's going to be on top of their game that weekend. So you just never know the outcome. And to be a broadcaster that's involved in sport like that, that's what the fans ask for. That's what everyone who's participating asks for. That sort of trepidation and anticipation as to what is going to be the final result. So yeah, that's kind of around the houses. It's different to commentary as such because, okay, I'm talking over the live pictures, but I might not necessarily be talking all the time as to what's happening, because I might be top and tailing, trying to contextualize some of the information that we've been getting from the American broadcasters, trying to add to that as well, and trying to break down sort of entry-level barriers. So the terminology is different. They might call new tires stickers. So people that are watching are like, what are they talking about? Putting stickers on the car, that kind of stuff. So that's my role. It's slightly different to that sort of live commentary that you would get if you were across the main broadcast. But, I absolutely love what I do there. And, Sky, our coverage is going from strength to strength, and the audience is wonderful. We have a great community that tunes in and engages online as well. And I'm, really, really fortunate to have found something that I love.
IndyCar then, because you've commentated on many different motorsports over the years, but why IndyCar? What is it that attracts you to it compared to other motorsports?
Um, as I said, really, it's that trepidation, that anticipation, the fact that there's so many different dominoes that have to come into line for you to clear up. It's the multidiscipline factor where you have the oval, you have the street course, you have the road course. You have to be so good over those three different disciplines. You know, you've got the two different tire compounds, you've got the hybrid now. There's so many different variations to what makes what makes up a competitive package. And if you look at just the ovals, for example, the drivers have to work their own tools. You'll hear the spotters and the strategists and the engineers talking about remember your tools, work your tools. You know, that's not just something whereby an engineer just gives you a code or tells you a setting that you need to switch on your steering wheel. You know, that is the drivers. They have total autonomy on that in terms of their front and rear roll bar and how they use those roll bars. And you can easily get lost when you're doing that, when you're using the weight jacker. The weight jacker is a third variation to that as well. And they all need to come together. And that really challenges the driver, the drivers with experience and knowledge and that sort of space, that free space to sort of utilize that knowledge, if you like. They're doing 230 miles an hour when they're trying to put all of this together. You know, that's what makes IndyCar really special for me.
Excellent. And, I've liked IndyCar. I've been following it more than I used to, quite frankly. And I'm sure a lot of other people have as well along the way, partly because of where they can watch it from. But has IndyCar been shown on Sky Sports F1 helped change the way the series is being portrayed by fans, particularly in the UK?
Yeah, I think there's no secret to the fact that having it on Sky Sports F1 opens you up to a really engaged and large audience that are really that are really there for F1, but now have that opportunity to sort of build on their motorsport interests and sort of transfer across to IndyCar as well. And when we're following on from, let's take the 500, for example, we've followed on from Monaco. You know, there will be millions of people tuned in for the Grand Prix for Monaco. And then if we go back to live Indy 500 coverage, you know, we will retain a large number of that audience. And that's what's really special about being on Sky Sports F1. It's a sort of golden escalator to that engaged core motorsport group that enjoy their F1, but now are enjoying their IndyCar as well because it's following on. So, you know, we're really grateful for that opportunity at Sky IndyCar.
Yeah, and I think the Indy 500 is the heartbeat of the IndyCar season.
Yeah,
And
definitely. I mean, the Indy 500, it's like that blue ribbon event. I'm not an American football fan, but I always watch the Super Bowl because there's just something special about the build up, the pomp and ceremony, everything that goes into it. And I alluded to that earlier on. The Americans do sport in such a wonderful way. They marry entertainment with sport. It's not for everyone, but it's something that I absolutely love, and so do millions of other people. And that's for me what makes the Indy 500 special, and the fact that it's a 500-mile race. So it's a long race where so much can happen. So you've really got to follow it from start to finish and know what's going on from a strategic perspective throughout each segment of the race.
yeah, absolutely. And I love Indianapolis. I love it as a racing circuit, whether it be the oval or the road course, which they also use during the course of the season. And also Formula One used to race at Indianapolis on the road course years ago. And it was part of the Formula One World Championship back in the 50s. You know, it was a big event, no matter which series it
The
would fall
Brickyard,
under. The
the famous
Brickyard.
yard of bricks. I love the fact that there's that famous yard of bricks, which caused problems actually for the Formula One when they first went back there, because obviously pole position was so close to the yard of bricks. And with the standing start, there was some discrepancy as to whether or not that would be a disadvantage in terms of traction and grip and everything else. So, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned it about the way Americans put on a show to sort of make it as entertaining as possible. Like you say, it's not for everyone. but for some it is, and that's kind of what's sort of being brought into Formula One at the moment. We've seen it in Las Vegas where they put on some form of entertainment on. I think Kylie Minogue was one of the guests at the Las Vegas Grand Prix last year. We've seen it also in Miami, and we've definitely seen it in Austin. Do you remember Michael Buffer in 2017 where he gave the introduction to the drivers
Yeah.
before they got him? Do you sort of see that within Formula One at the moment, the way the Americans sort of trying to make it more like a theatre of entertainment for the sport?
Yeah, and I think, it needs that. If we see what is being played out across the rest of the world, it's a festival in terms of the whole weekend. We see that in the Iowa weekend, the doubleheader in IndyCar, where they've got concerts on. They've had Ed Sheeran. They have so much going on for the fans, and I think Liberty have recognised that it's not just a motor race and a sort of technical and sort of tactical affair. That there's that, but there has to be so much more to the weekend that makes it more inclusive, that invites more people in to see what it's all about. So you have a bit of everything to cater for everyone's interest. So I think Liberty are excellent at that. I think IndyCar are doing more and more. There's no secret that Penske Entertainment are plumbing more money into IndyCar since they've taken over. I think they've done a fantastic job. IndyCar has a way to go and is working hard. But if you look at the Indy 500 weekend, they are definitely there. And that is definitely one of the blue ribbon flagship events anywhere in the world. It's the most attended race in terms of backsides on seats anywhere in the world, if you look at the numbers. So that for me is a very, very special event. And it's just about picking that momentum up and trying to make the other events very special. Long Beach is special already because of history it has. And Iowa's been great because of the amount of money that Hy-Vee put in and the concerts and everything else. And, each event has different promoters, different contracts, different interests, different budgets. But, it's about getting all of those events up to the same level.
Do you feel that Formula One would benefit from going back to Indianapolis, and would Indianapolis benefit from Formula One going back there? Do you think it would work for both parties?
Do you know what? I think there's room for both in America. I mean, obviously, Formula One under Liberty has cracked America, something that Bernie never managed to do. And Liberty are doing wonderful things with Formula One. And that is not a competition for IndyCar. I think there's room for both. And I think that's only a benefit for IndyCar because, like I've alluded to on the Sky Sports F1 audience, whereby people are showing intrigue and crossing over and watching, as well as their Formula One content, the IndyCar content. I think that transpires to America and the US audience and people attending events as well. The more interest there is around open wheel racing in America, which has predominantly been a NASCAR powerhouse, the better it is for IndyCar, because those people that are watching Formula One that only get to see Formula One maybe once, twice a year in person can then follow a national championship. IndyCar is a fantastic national championship to have in your country, and those people will have more access to IndyCar than they do Formula One. So I think it's only going to be a benefit. And I think both of the championships, whether or not it's F1 or IndyCar, can certainly utilize each other's fan bases and push forward together, not being in competition with each other.
Going back to you about Formula One, and you've obviously worked with F1 TV, as a commentator a couple of years ago now, I think, since the last one you did. Was it Hungary, the last one that you did? Or was it late? Yeah, Hungary was the last one you did. I remember you being over for Monaco as well. I think you were over during the Silverstone weekend in 2022 alongside Chris McCarthy for commentary duties in F2. How do you sort of reflect on your time at Formula One, being over in Biggin Hill and sort of keeping an eye on the action compared to what you usually do
But you know what? It's a good question because I started my career as a driver, and I always dreamt as a young kid of being in F1, and that was with a steering wheel in my hand. Fast forward sort of 20 years, I eventually did get to F1, albeit I'd swapped the steering wheel for a microphone. So in terms of a personal milestone, that was very, very special. And, Formula One is essentially the pinnacle of the sport. So any time that you spend in Formula One is very special, and is something to cherish and enjoy, definitely. And I look back at that with fond memories. I have to say that there's something special when I'm broadcasting on the IndyCar. There's something special about how I feel when I do that and the fit. So a bit like a driver might not quite gel in their sort of year or two that they're in F1. Look at Nick De Vries, look at whoever it is. But then we'll go and find a home somewhere else in motorsport, and that home will be will be a really happy place for them, and that's very similar to me, whereby I'm very fortunate to have been in F1, and I'd love to work in F1 again. There's no regrets. It's not like I've got to get back to F1. I love every second of my time in IndyCar, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I'm not looking back, I'm looking forwards, and IndyCar is definitely my happy place.
Yeah, I can imagine so because IndyCar does put on a show. And when you look at drivers, you mentioned those like Nick De Vries, who has had short stints in F1. Marcus Ericsson is quite another example of it. He had 5 years with F1, the first year being with Caterham and the remainder being with Sauber. But if you look at his record now in IndyCar, that tells you a different story, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just the professional side, it's that personal side. It's how you carry yourself, the smile you've got on your face. Formula One is definitely a pressure cooker of a mixture of emotions, and it might not always be the most enjoyable time based on your circumstance, what car you're in, this and that. Look at Logan Sargent, for example. But that doesn't define you, and that doesn't mean that you've lost the ability that got you to Formula One. And there's homes in motorsport, whether or not it's World Endurance, Le Mans, IndyCar, whatever it is, or Formula E, that are very, very happy places on a personal level for drivers. And I'm 43 years of age now. I've got lots of friends that have been through that professional pathway, and not everyone has enjoyed every step of the ladder, but at the end, there's times that people look back on, depending on the championship, with really fond memories. And so, I think for Marcus Ericsson now, taking it back to that conversation, yeah, you'll look back at Formula One and be super proud and impressed and happy and pleased with what he achieved. But he's definitely taken to IndyCar and made a name for himself and made a home for himself. And he's always got a smile on his face, and that's nice to see.
From your personal point of view, what's the future for IndyCar, both in the sport and how it's being televised?
So the deal with Penske was really important. They've driven a lot of money and they've driven the series forward. We've got the new charter that's been announced. That is to try and provide a return of investment to the teams, try and provide a value to the entry. So in terms of monetizing each entry like a franchise, if you like NFL, that's really important. So they've made a really strong case for IndyCar being a business for the teams. And that's great for sustainability. We'll just see how much value those charters have once we get down the line. They're doing more in terms of the marketing. You've only got to see with what they've done with Hy-Vee, but also what they're doing with the Dallas Cowboys, the Texas Rangers, and the new Arlington Grand Prix that's been announced this week. So I think Penske have been huge for the series, they can always do more, they can always do better, and there's lots of discussion around that. People are impatient, but I do think they are driving the series forward. We've got the new deal with Fox and taking that to a bigger audience. It's going to piggyback just like we do off of the F1 audience. Fox have the NASCAR audience. They've got the Daytona 500. You know, there's going to be lots of those fans making the transition across to IndyCar. So it's going to be building a bigger and more engaged audience. Fox are really keen to get promoting and get going with things. And so there's lots of pluses. We've had the introduction of the hybrid unit, but we still need a new car. We still need more races in other big markets, Mexico, for example. You know, we need a longer calendar. Certain reasons why we don't have that, not just budget, but because of the NFL season and broadcasting rights and windows and that kind of thing. But, you know, there are things that a lot of the fans would love to see, and definitely a new car is one of those, and some new races as well.
I've asked this question to someone else. Would IndyCar benefit from racing more abroad, particularly in Europe?
It has to be sustainable and it has to be economically viable. So what I mean by that is it's yeah, it'd be great, but they have to make money. It's a business. And I think there are markets that are engaged where there is opportunity, where there is a big commercial win to be had there. You know, we've talked about Mexico already. It would be lovely to see something in Europe. It has been tried before. You know, I haven't seen the numbers in terms of how successful that is, but you know, it's a championship and a sport like many other industries and businesses that is recovering from a really difficult economic spell during the COVID years and off the back of those COVID years. So it has to be sustainable and it has to be economically viable. There's not huge amounts of cash to burn through. And so we need to be mindful of that. But I'd love to see more races. And yeah, I'd love to see a race in the UK.
I mean, from your experience, what have you found the most challenging in being a commentator?
Yeah, so from a commentating perspective, no one teaches you how to do it. And I started as a driver, and you make your way into the commentary arena, kind of finding your own way. And in today's day and age of social media, if you don't quite get things right, people will tell you about it. They will not just tell you about it. They'll be quite mean, quite rude, and quite abusive about that. And that's challenging in its own right, because you're just a person that's trying to build a new career, doing something that you love, but finding your way at the same time. But you're doing that in a very public environment. So we're all human. Mistakes happen. We're all trying to be better. So those are the biggest challenges, really. The fact that you're constantly looking to improve, but actually your main practice time is when you're being watched by hundreds of thousands of people that have all got an opinion, whether or not it's, you know, a good one. Then, you know, if it's not, you definitely have to have thick skin, because rarely do you get told you've done a good job, but you will get told if you've done a bad job. But I have to say, the Sky IndyCar audience and the IndyCar fans are really inclusive, are really kind, are really empathetic towards new fans, to questions being asked, to my coverage. Everybody's in it together, and everybody comes together to enjoy the sport, and they do it in a really warm way. And so I've really enjoyed that side of things. So well done. Well done, all the Sky IndyCar fans and the IndyCar fans all over the world that watch the coverage.
Going on to other motorsport, you've commentated on the Le Mans 24 Hour, the World Endurance Championship, World Superbikes, the World Touring Car Cup, Formula E. and the FIM Endurance World Championship. So yeah, for those who are watching, try not to get that mixed up with the World Endurance Championship, because
Yeah.
that's a bit of a tongue twister, that one. You have to sort of address that to the audience the next time you
Yeah.
do that particular thing. But how do you sort of reflect also on the time? It was with Discovery and Eurosport, isn't it? And I think you're still doing some stuff for them, aren't you?
Yeah, I do loads for Discovery and Eurosport, and that's really where I've spent a lot of my time. And from the very first moment that I walked through the doors at Eurosport when we were back at Feltham, Simon Reed invited me in, who's a wonderfully kind man and has started and supported so many commentators in their careers, as well as having his own remarkably, impressive CV and commentary career. So from those very first moments at Discovery, or Eurosport as it was known back then, everybody's been wonderfully kind and has given me so many different opportunities to sort of get my head around whether or not it's moving away from the four-wheeled world and working on World Superbikes or the Endurance World Championship or British Superbike weekends, which are very, very different to the four-wheel world. I absolutely love the bikes. Very, very different dynamic. And just watching the riders get through weekends without being injured and the risks that they take and the knocks that they take and the attitude that they have. And, it's a great paddock and a great championship and sport to work in, right the way through to the Olympics, which is totally out of my comfort zone, talking about sports that I don't know a huge amount about prior to sort of hosting and linking and talking about those sports. So I've been very, very lucky to do 2 summer games and 1 winter games, and that's all come about through Eurosport, Discovery and Warner Brothers. So I've spent a huge amount of time there, and I'm eternally grateful for the opportunities that they've given me.
Yeah, but you talk about the Olympic Games, which leads me on to my next question, actually. Which events was it that you were presenting about, or was it just a very big mixture of sort
Yeah,
of
a good
track?
question. So I was sort of hosting linking sports and doing the medal alerts, making sure we don't miss medals if we're broadcasting to a British audience. So to give you a brief example, if the channel is on, I don't know, gymnastics, and we want to wrap up from the gymnastics and move to the rowing, I will come in, do a summary as to what we've seen in that segment of the gymnastics, what's still to come, where we're going, what we're going to be watching at the rowing, and then deliver any medal alerts as well. So what's going on around the rest of the games for that morning, afternoon, or whatever it is. So it's about just being across absolutely everything and knowing an awful lot without knowing an awful lot. It's the most intense and enjoyable experience, really special. And I never thought as a young racing driver, A, I'd be a broadcaster, but B, I'd be doing anything out of motorsport and be involved in the Olympics, for example.
Yeah. Do you get that typical pressure from television viewers that know you from one sport in particular, which is obviously motorsport, that you are synonymous with, to being a broadcaster in another sport?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we see it in entertainment as well. If you're a comedian, you can't play a serious role, or if you're a gangster or the baddie in entertainment programs, you can't play the cop or whoever it is. We see that across movies, entertainment, whatever it is, and you see that in sport as well. If you are in you are viewed as a motorsport commentator, it's very, very difficult to get an opportunity in another sport and or to take yourself out of that window, because there's lots of wonderful commentators already doing great things in the other sports. And yeah, people will obviously rightly look at those individuals ahead of you in terms of opportunity.
Mm. I was going to say there's been some examples of personalities or even professional sports stars, like Jermaine Genius, for instance, who's
Yeah,
been involved in the Formula E side of things, but people know him on the basis of his football.
yeah,
And Andy Goldstein, do you know him?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's been involved in football and snooker.
Yes.
So that tells you it's
We
nice to be versatile, isn't it?
we see it on the, the Channel 4 F1 as well. We've seen it across various different championships, but I think I won't say it's easier because nothing's easy. But when you're hosting, it is slightly easier than the commentary, just because with the commentary, you are essentially the voice, getting the terminology right, getting those stories that are inside stories that the audience don't know about, living and breathing the sport and knowing everything about what's going on in every garage, in every driver's corner, and whatever it is. That's really, really hard to sort of obtain that knowledge and experience. And so I think commentary is really hard to step across. That's why I end up doing a hosting job in the Olympics, because actually for me to step in and commentate properly on a sport would be very, very difficult.
I can imagine so as well, because if a commentator does a substandard job, people will sort of remember that for a very, very long time, especially with the
It might be your last job.
yeah, okay. I can imagine so as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully that won't happen to you by any means.
Yeah.
But do you think that's
It's
the
in the
kind
back of my mind every time I go on air.
oh really? Do you
I
think that's
always
the
say to myself, if this is the last thing I ever do, I'm going to enjoy it.
well, that's the best way to go about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But do you think that's the kind of challenge that a youngster would sort of go into? Let's say like a 21-year-old individual that's just graduated from their bachelor's. What do you think the challenges they sort of face in being in like a broadcaster of any way? Because some people are lucky enough in their early 20s to get an opportunity within a major broadcasting company, but for those, it just takes a bit of time.
I think the biggest challenge is being themselves and enjoying it. So much of that time, if I look back at when I was trying to be a racing driver, was trying to emulate other people, trying to look at what other people do, and they're successful, they're further up the ladder, so I've got to be like them. And you also forget to enjoy it when the pressure comes on. It's a lot easier when you get older, when you understand yourself more, when you have more confidence, experience, to sort of put your stamp on it. So don't be a second-rate version of somebody else. Don't look at Tom Gaymor or Harry Benjamin, whoever it is, and Alex Jackson, and say, you know, that's who I want to sound like. That's who I want to be. Actually, do it your way. Be the best rate version of yourself. And who knows where you might end up? You might end up, don't restrict yourself. You might end up ahead of them. So having the confidence to be yourself and do it your way, and also enjoy it, because, as I say, you put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect. There's no such thing as being perfect. You will make mistakes. It won't go right. It's about engaging the audience and enjoying what you do with the audience and making sure they enjoy listening to you as well, and that your passion and your enjoyment shines through. So never lose sight of that. So that's the sort of advice that I try and give to as many people as possible, but with the disclaimer that it is a learning journey. I've trodden that, albeit as a driver. It's hard when you're young, trying to understand what works for you and also trying to do it your way.
We'll go on to your racing career next, Tom, because you've raced in Formula Fords in the early noughties, didn't you? And I'm trying to remember. I think you raced also in sort of British F4 Championship or something like that, didn't you?
Yeah, I did a bit of testing, F3, World Series, that kind of stuff. Really enjoyed those years. I started in France, in Le Mans. So before I did Formula Ford, which was basically Renault Campus, which was like Formula 4. It was like a baby Formula Renault car, and did a year out there, and then came over and did a few years over here. Was trying to make the step to Formula 3, and then obviously through injury and a lack of budget and career momentum, had to hang up my helmet and try and do something new. At 43, that seems so long ago, but it seems like yesterday in your head.
The moment where you picked up your injury, I remember you discussing it a couple of years back, because these machines that you raced in were not very strong at sustaining
No.
things like
You know what?
braking.
It was less about the sort of the car, but you're right. It was a tubular chassis, so had it wasn't a carbon fiber monocoque. So I had push rods penetrate through into my leg, that kind of stuff. Various different things. Once you crashed and the skin of the car had come off, if you were rolling or whatever it is, there was just tubes and big hollow holes in between those tubes. It was a tubular chassis, so it was sort of yesteryear. At least the cockpits were built up a bit, but I did test an old F3 car that didn't have that. So I was right on that cusp of when safety was really pushing forward, and rightfully so. But it was my back that wasn't strong enough,
Was
as
it?
opposed to the car. So I had something called a spondylolisthesis, which is where the base of your spine, the bone doesn't form properly, but that was undiagnosed because actually 20% of the world's population have it. Is not a big deal. You might get the occasional backache, but not enough to really do anything about it, and have all of the intrusive MRI scans and diagnosis, if you like, to put it right. Not, I actually didn't know that I had this, but because there was not proper bony union in that area, when I exposed it to big force, so a crash or whatever it is, that the bone wasn't strong enough. The sort of cartilage wasn't strong enough to withstand that force, and so that's why I had the issue whereby actually my back was essentially in two halves. I had to have all of the excuse me, I had to have all of the uh, bone grafts from my pelvis to build around the screws and everything that they put in, and that it was really invasive surgery. So really lucky, touch wood, to have made it here without too many issues, because actually I have a wonderfully active life. I can do pretty much anything that I want to do. I don't run long distances. I don't sit for long periods of time. I try and avoid things like power boating and jet skiing, whereby you're putting uh, large amounts of forces through your lumbar spine if you're coming off of a wave or whatever it is. But there's a million and one things that I can do, and I'm very, very fortunate to have had the surgical team that I did, and the surgery that I did, and the recovery that I've had.
Throughout your time as a racer, who did you sort of race against, who you regard as a phenomenal racing driver who would go on to do great things in Formula One, or at least they should have gone on to do great things in Formula One?
Yeah, so my era, I was racing against, in France, I was racing against people like Alexandre Premat and Olivier Pla. Premat was Hamilton's teammate at ART in Formula 2. Pla has gone on to do really well in the endurance world. And, when I was racing in Formula Ford, I was teammates with the likes of Oliver Jarvis, who went on to do really good things and is still doing really good things in the GT world. I had really good competitors like Adam Carroll, who very, very quick driver from Northern Ireland, probably one of the quickest drivers that I've seen, really. Um, but Van der Merwe, Rob Bell, all people like that in and around the Formula Ford team. Danica Patrick was racing for Hayward when I was there. We had lots of good people. I mean, Lewis was doing Formula Renault on the same weekend in my final year, so it was good to see what he was up to, and the hype around him. And he was so young and achieving wonderful things straight away.
We'll go on to about the consultancy company that you run at the moment. What's the whole idea behind that, and what is its purpose?
Yeah, so I team up with various other consultants, and we provide solutions for mainly around performance for corporates and or individuals, and that's centering around human performance. So we might look at a company that wants that sort of 360-degree deliverable around human performance and the benefits that come with that, or it might be an athlete or a team that are looking to improve their outcomes when it comes to performance. So, we have various different clients, and as I say, various different consultants that I team up with and work with, and that's very much, I'm fascinated in people. So as I've grown up through sport, and I've looked at the way sport is set up and the way that human beings engage around sport so much, and this is the same for the corporate world, business, whatever it is. So much of our development is around the professional, around sort of professional outcomes, as opposed to the human being, which underpins and informs those professional outcomes, informs the performer, if you like. So a bit like I was just talking about a second ago regarding being yourself, knowing what works for you, enjoying things. It is very important that we have that sort of toolkit as a human being to go out and be the best that we can be in the most important moments of our lives. Because if we just focus on the technical and tactical, on the sort of process, the deliverables in those big moments, and we don't have that human toolkit or the emotional intelligence or whatever it is to manage what the occasion demands of us, then you very, very quickly see the outcomes erode, and the experience is not always an enjoyable one as well. So I'm fascinated in people, and I'm really interested in working with people in and around the performance field. So that's what the consultancy is for. It's just a little sidearm off of the back of my TV work.
Yeah. It mentions also about the Carlin Academy and the MSA Academy. Now, the MSA Academy are involved in Formula 4 because obviously that's, I think, because I remember Lando Norris competed, I think it was under Formula 4 MSA, I think it was back then.
Yeah.
And Lando Norris was
Colton
on
Herta.
Colton Herta as well.
Who's his teammate, yeah.
Oh, excellent. And yeah, so many top drivers. Which drivers would you say you've sort of contributed to you you've contributed to it under the consultancy of yours? Because with Carlin Academy, they've obviously helped raise so many drivers up through the junior ranks, and I imagine within MSA as well, they sort of help young drivers through their junior careers before they go on to huge things. Which ones do you think have always stuck with you since you started the consultancy 13 years ago?
Yeah, I've been super fortunate to work with so many different drivers, and it's not just about the sort of the ultimate outcome in terms of what they've achieved. It's how they've gone and achieved it, if that makes sense. So it's whether or not they've maximized their potential, or whether or not they've enjoyed it. That I think is the most rewarding thing. Protecting people from the pressure, helping people embrace that and be the best that they can be. Those are the special moments. But and actually seeing people do. I was just watching the British touring car stuff at the weekend, and Dino Zamparelli, who was on the MSA Academy, is now doing wonderful things as a team manager and team owner in the Porsche Carrera Cup and the Challenge Sprint Cup. So, it's great to see people go on and do things like that. Chris McCarthy, who I worked with on the Academy, he left and has created, with a bit of help and support from me, a wonderfully successful career in commentary and broadcasting. And so it's nice to see people grow and people flourish, really, without sounding corny or cheesy. It's nice to see them go on and be the best that they can be, whatever it is that they're doing, whether or not it's behind the wheel or just being good at something else.
Going back to your broadcasting career, you've worked with many different clients, including BBC Radio 5 Live, BT Sport, now known as TNT Sport, Discovery, Eurosport, Formula One, IMG, ITV Sports, Sky Sports F1, and motorsport.com.
Yeah.
In the people that you've worked with, presenting wise, and maybe those off air as well, producers and all those, which ones would you sort of say you've enjoyed working with the most?
Yeah, do you know what? TV's a really good industry to wear a smile, because actually most people are just enjoying what they do, and most people are there because they're passionate about whatever it is that you're broadcasting. And so it's actually a really warm place to work, because people just want to enjoy not having a proper job. And I say that facetiously. Obviously, it's incredibly hard work, and the skills and the professionalism and everything that goes into making a TV production is phenomenal. There's so many talented people, depending, doesn't matter what side of the camera you're on. But there's a saying in motorsport that a bad day at the racetrack is always better than a good day in the office. And, people are genuinely loving what they do, and very, very fortunate to have the experience that they have. And that shines through. So you work with great people, talented people, and you work in an environment where not many people take that for granted, and are incredibly supportive. Now I've got to where I've got to. I've mentioned Simon Reed, but there's lots of other people as well that have supported me on my way, and lots of really successful people who have taken the time to respond. So I've got to where I am because they took the time to respond. They took the time to help me. They signposted me. If they couldn't help, they passed me on to somebody else. And I'll forever be grateful for those individuals. And I always make time to contact or respond to people that contact me as well. So yeah, I mean, listen, I've worked with lots of great people. I was really impressed with Orla in Paris. I think what she did during the Discovery coverage of the Olympics was really special. She's also doing great things in the cycling world and rugby world, but she makes presenting look really easy. And she had so much going on in her ears, and was so cool, calm, collected, but also so respectful to everyone around her. She was never flustered. She never passed that emotion on to anyone else. If she was just wonderfully graceful. And I've worked with loads of other people that are like that. I mean, the list would go on and on and on. I'm still doing what I do today because of those people, because everyone makes it so enjoyable.
You're now at the age of 43. You've done a lot of broadcasting for many years now and worked with so many different clients. Where are you looking to be in the next 10 years? What's the target for Tom Gaymor?
Yeah, it's a good question. And sometimes I say I don't want for anything. And that's really disappointing to most people, because they want me to say something really inspirational. And actually the hidden meaning behind that is so much of my young life. I was always looking at what came next, and I forgot to enjoy what I was doing. I forgot to love the present. And it's really easy to be in the future or in the past in terms of our lens or mindset, but it's hard to be in the present. And so I work really hard now to be in the present and just love what I have. And so the meaning behind not wanting for anything is just to actually love what I've got, and to cherish what I've got. So I just want to keep enjoying, keep being part of the IndyCar coverage, and anything else that comes my way is obviously a bonus. And I do work hard. I do I'm constantly trying to network, constantly trying to be where the next opportunity is, constantly trying to challenge myself in terms of can I do something else? But it's not where my focus is. That's just me being diligent, me showing a bit of endeavor and me wanting to work hard. But in terms of what I've got, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Which commentating moments do you reflect on and think, I'm so glad I nailed that particular moment given the circumstances? For instance, has there been like a championship moment in either IndyCar or another motorsport where the intensity has risen and you sort of thinking to yourself, I've got to make sure I absolutely perfect this level of commentary for the audience that are watching?
Do you know what? It, I try and take the moment out of it because if you're focused on the moment, you're focused on the outcome. If you're focused on the outcome, you fear failure. So I try and just focus on what it is that I need to do. And that is the same process that I apply to talking to you or for closing the Olympics for Eurosport or talking on the Indy 500. And it's really, really important to focus on process and to know what your process is and to know that you trust that process. And then you can apply that process to lots of different things. You don't get overawed by the occasion. It's a bit like taking a penalty in football. You know, if it's for the World Cup final and you start focusing on what's at stake, you know, you're probably going to hit it over the bar. But actually, if you can just focus on what it is that you need to do and shut everything else out and forget the occasion, you stand a better chance of sort of executing that process.
On to IndyCar, or back to IndyCar. Alex Palou winning yet another championship in IndyCar this year, if I remember correctly. But from your years, how do you reflect on IndyCar as a championship? Because we've seen so many different race winners. It's very well wide open. Alex Palou, I even remember Alex Palou when he was racing in Formula 2, albeit rather briefly. I think there was one round where he was teammates with Lando Norris in Abu Dhabi for Campos. That's correct. And how do you summarize his career in particular for such a young man who's destined for huge things? When you look at
Well,
Scott Dixon, for
the
instance.
thing is he came through with Adrian Campos, the late Adrian Campos. And, you know, he was doing Euro Formula, which was a substitute for F3 at the time. He didn't have the backing, he didn't have the budget. Campos saw something in him and he said from a very early age, you know, this guy is special. A bit like people say with, you know, all of the young proteges that come through, there is something special about this guy. He didn't have the backing, he didn't have the career momentum that some of the other young drivers have. He then went to Japan, formed that relationship with Honda. You know, Campos put him in the F2 car, that kind of stuff. But it was really that relationship with Honda and that you know, that sort of shining light that Honda saw in him that took him to America. And he's, you know, gone on to do incredible things in a championship where it's very, very difficult to be incredible. And I think you touched on at the end of the question there before I rudely interrupted. And you mentioned Scott Dixon. Um, you know, to go into that stable where Scott Dixon's arguably the GOAT, the greatest of all time, and do what he's done and sort of, you know, now we don't look up and down the pit lane. Well, we do, actually. That's being unfair. We do look up and down the pit lane and wonder what Scott Dixon's doing. But we do look up and down the pit lane. Everyone does. And goes, well, what's Palou doing? You know, is Palou starting on the blacks or is he starting on the reds? You know, Palou's superpower is his pace on the black tires on the primary tire. So the the bar that he's set in IndyCar is really, really high. But his story is a special one because it wasn't a case of, right, this guy's super talented and he's destined for great things. You know, he had to really fight to be where he is now.
Mm-hmm. You look back maybe on your life let's say in your teenage years, because you were obviously karting, did you ever think to yourself that you would want to be a broadcaster, or was racing always the one thing that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I was totally focused on racing, and that's not to dismiss broadcasting, but if you're totally focused on doing something that's so impossibly difficult to do in terms of the amounts of people that do it and the money that you need to raise and the opportunity and stuff like that, you need to be so obsessed with it and so focused on trying to get the job done. There's not really much space for anything else. And actually, when I was told that I couldn't drive, it was a really hard time in my life. I didn't really want to be involved in motorsport anymore. And that was because, I was heartbroken at the end of the day. That was my dream, and it was sort of snatched away from me. So it wasn't really until the dust had settled that I realized that that's where my friends are. That's where my expertise was, and that's where my passion still lied. And what opportunities were there in the sport? Broadcasting's quite difficult to get into, or it was then. It wasn't something that you just decided you wanted to do. I was very fortunate to get an opportunity, take it, and love doing it. Broadcasting is almost like being a driver to a certain extent. Certainly the commentary side, because the adrenaline rush of live TV and being part of a live event, there's that performer element. You are going to be critiqued. You are going to have to perform at a high level. You're going to have to know what your process is and deliver on it. You're going to have to battle through the nerves and swallow the adrenaline and be the best that you can be in those really nerve-wracking moments. And that's very much like being a driver. So that sort of personal side and the feeling that you get is something that I sort of, in a strange way, enjoy still.
For all the young hopefuls out there who are wanting to work within the sports media world, not necessarily as a broadcaster, but working within broadcasting, in the society we live in today, what would be your advice to them? Because the chances are they're going to be on a limited budget. They're probably thinking about college, uni, apprenticeships. Is it going to come down to who you network with that's going to help propel your career? Do perhaps degrees have any form of value, like a media production degree, like I've got? Does
I
that
think
have any? Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think it's important because you need that underpinning knowledge, you need that experience. In terms of networking, you will still get that, whether or not it's peers or people on your course or whatever it is, you will still get that in that learning environment. Then it's a case of being lucky. You make your own luck. So if you knew where the next opportunity was, you'd be there now. So you have to turn every stone over. You have to be passionate and resilient to the cause, that's going to be timely, that's going to take you down avenues that you didn't think you would be going down, or that you might not want to go down because your dream's over there and now you're going off, focusing on something else that you might not feel is taking you towards your dream. It might at the time feel like you're moving away from it, but it's another way round. It's another avenue. It's another journey. So momentum's everything. So even if you think you're moving away, just be pleased that you're moving. Mm-hmm. So the networking point that you allude to, that's so important. No one is going to walk into your front living room and offer you an opportunity. You're going to have to walk into theirs, and that's really, really important. But being resilient to the cause is so important. Managing those emotions, because people won't reply all the time. Be grateful for the people that do, but accept that some won't. You will face so much disappointment before you get that one win. And it's about recognizing and shaping that disappointment. It's about, if you didn't quite get the answer that you wanted to, get something out of that. So if it's a no, okay, you can't help, but can you put me in contact with someone that will? And actually shaping that disappointment into a, that's momentum. I'm still moving because I've been given another email address, another individual to speak to, another, so it's about just momentum, being resilient to the cause, managing that disappointment, and just having that endeavor to really, really, really chase absolutely everything, and to keep doing it, because you just don't know when that opportunity will arise and where it is.
Mhm. And LinkedIn's another place where a lot of young hopefuls are trying to network with as many people as possible. I happen to be one who's connected with thousands now. I'm connected with a lot of people within the industry, and I'm sure you are as well. Would you say that LinkedIn is one of the main avenues where people who are lacking in experience but have an idea as to what they want to go into? Is LinkedIn the best place to get to be in contact with the people who are going to be ideal to your career path?
Yeah, LinkedIn's obviously extremely valuable. You don't know how active people are on LinkedIn, so that's really annoying because you don't know if whether or not people are going to engage with you. I always do say though, with things like LinkedIn, always have an idea as to why you want to engage with someone or connect with someone. So try and turn that connection into something. So if I'm going to engage with someone on LinkedIn, it's because I want to ask them something very specific. I think that's really, really important. Don't lose sight of that. People, if you want help, know what it is that you want help with, know where you're going. They might not be able to help, but have that vision, have that dream.
Well, Tom, it's been brilliant chatting with you, and it's great advice you've just given there to a lot of people who are wanting to sort of follow a similar path to where you've gone, maybe not as a racer, but to go and get either a qualification or specific experience at somewhere that's going to propel their careers. And thank you for your time in discussing your career as well and your career path. And we hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Tom.
No problem.